Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're signing in from. It's good to see everyone here and to be given this exceptional opportunity to engage with one another. My name is Philip F. Young, and I am a professor of theater studies at Michigan State University, where I also teach integrative arts and humanities courses. I will be the moderator of this panel, which has as its theme, cultural heritage and creative arts as sites of memory and dialogue. This session is actually part one of a broader conversation in which we will be mapping this landscape, which means we will examine how cultural heritage and the arts serve as important channels through which memory and history are preserved, as well as how they provoke necessary and healthy conversations about the values that make us who we are. Part two of this conversation will focus on practitioner experiences and insights and will be covered in the next panel. To drive this conversation, we have with us three outstanding panelists. They are Asali DeVan, Ecclesiastes, the Executive Director of Ashe Cultural Arts Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, Madaha Kinsey-Lamb, the Director of Mind Builders Creative Arts Center in the Bronx, New York, and Zala Palmer, the Chair and Director of the Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture at Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. I would now like to call on each panelist to tell us a little bit more about themselves. I'd like to start with Asali Ecclesiastes.
How is everyone today? I'm so excited to join you from New Orleans and from the Ashe Cultural Arts Center here in Central City, New Orleans. We are a 23-year-old organization that I have had the great blessing of taking over leadership for last year. Even in the midst of the pandemic, it's been an adventure. But Ashe is an organization that uses art and culture to celebrate and elevate the people, places, and philosophies of the African diaspora. And so our work is really about using those cultural and artistic strategies to make real changes in community. We believe in equity and practice an equity platform, practice results-based accountability measures, and do everything that we can to make sure that our solutions actually make changes for the people in the community that we serve, starting with the most vulnerable citizens of New Orleans.
Thank you so much, Asali Ecclesiastes. And now, Madaha Kinsey-Lamb, we would also like to know a little bit more about you and your work.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with you all. I started our center, Mind Builders Creative Arts Center, in the Bronx in 1978 when I was 28 years old. And I was working as an education director in a community program on the other side of our borough. Years earlier, I'd been a public school teacher who thought that one day I'd start a full-day independent school that would naturally integrate the arts into its academic curriculum. So I was kind of surprised that the way things turned out. It was a cultural center and it was mostly arts, more than the academics that evolved and was birthed. When I couldn't find quality arts and culture for my 4-year-old daughter in our neighborhood, traveling on the train to Manhattan, I decided after just a month to use my Saturdays off from work to try hiring a dance teacher and try offering classes in our community. Now Mind Builders provides classes for more than 500 students each week. And it had been more before it had to go remote, and now switching back. It's children, teens, and adults, but mostly youth, learning various forms of music, dance, drama, martial arts, and our very special Dr. Beverly J. Robinson Community Folk Culture Program that we began in 1988. The youth in that program, ages 14 to 21, they learn to identify, document, and present the traditions, the artists, the artisans, the tradition bearers who are in their families, neighborhood, borough, and city. We've been fortunate through the friendship and partnership initiatives of Dr. Diana Baird and Jai that you'll meet later, and her always exciting work at the Smithsonian Folklife Center to continue to learn through them, further develop, and have opportunities to share our approach and our curriculum with organizations in regions of the United States and Virgin Islands too over the decades. There are tradition bearers who may have learned their art form from someone in their family or community while growing up, or they created it over many years of dedication and creativity. They've been people like the Black Cowgirl that our students are interviewing right now as we talk, fashion designers like Dapper Dan in Harlem and Kirby Jean Ramon in Brooklyn by way of Haiti, traditional dancers, drum makers, doo-wop or gospel singers, a popular family or local chef, or the herbalists like Roots Dr. Baba Rassan of Sundial Health Store in the neighborhood and his garden of herbs behind his shop off the busy street. Yesterday, there were break dancers renting our space and coaching a young double dutch team from Florida. The key though to all of it, through all of it, has always been the concept of Ubuntu. When you enter Mind Builders, the words at the top of the mural behind the front desk are those of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. One day we will wake up and discover we are family.
Wonderful, Madaha, thank you so much. And finally, but certainly not least, Zella Palmer, could you also provide us with more information about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, and just so grateful to be in community and spirit. And even though we're in this pandemic, just quickly a little bit about myself and the work that I do at Dillard University. In 2003, just to give you all a backstory, in 2003, Ray Charles gave an endowment to Dillard University to create a material culture, an African-American material culture program. He was very passionate about preserving, celebrating, and teaching the next generation about African-American culture, particularly with food, since his mother and his grandmother were sharecroppers. Since that time, our first chair was the amazing Dr. Jessica B. Harris. If many of you all have probably seen her work on High on the Hog on Netflix. And then I came along in 2014. Since then, I've been building infrastructure and community programming. We've had plenty cooking demos with local chefs, national chefs. We launched my students and I, who are filmmakers and film students, we produced a documentary that's on YouTube called The Story of New Orleans Creole Cooking, The Black Hand in the Pot, that now has about 70,000 views. This summer, we are working on a grant that we received from the Council of Independent Colleges and Yale University to look at the legacies of American slavery as it pertains to food, music, and tourism. We just received another amount of funding from the Ray Charles Foundation to give scholarships to students with our newly launched food studies minor that we launched last year that we're hoping will eventually be a major, because we're the second HBCU to have a food studies program. And there's only 3 PWIs who have food studies programs. And part of the money that we just received from the Ray Charles Foundation will also go to fix our greenhouse. We live in a food apartheid area in Gentilly, and throughout New Orleans, corner stores and our way of food and fast food in Gentilly, unfortunately. And that was something that Ray Charles was very passionate about. He wanted to make sure that this generation knew what down home cooking looked like, what a real tomato tastes like, and so on. So, we are excited about what is to come for the Ray Charles program, and we will continue to do research, produce documentaries with our students, give them opportunities, mentorship, scholarships, et cetera, and continue to build with other organizations, to not only, talk about food, but talk about the breadth of Black culture nationally and internationally.
Amazing. Just listening to all that you've said, I think there's a common thread here already, and that's art as not just art for its sake, but art as something that can be functional and that can be part of a serious growth process. And another common thread I think is that there doesn't seem to be a strict distinction. I don't think any of you have made a strict distinction between culture and art. And just listening to even just listening to Zella talk about food, I'm sitting down here. Food is one of my favorite things, but for the first time, I'm thinking about food as something that can be artistic. What I'd like to do is connect all of this to the main topic. And let's start there. And that way, I think we'll make the connections as we move on. But let's just start with the basic question that I have here. And that question is, what does cultural heritage mean to you? And you can also go ahead while answering that question and say how you think it is significant to the broader Ubuntu philosophy. And so again, the question, what does cultural heritage mean to you? And how is it significant to the broader Ubuntu philosophy? And you don't have to, you can answer this. There's no particular order. So anyone who wants to go first can go first.
So first I'll say that I do believe that there is a distinction between art and culture. Art being an expression of culture, right? I think that culture is the way that a group of people approach life, the way that they approach solution making, the way that they build traditions, and the way that they build community and commune with one another, right? Build family, build society. And I think, that the art we create is a reflection, of those cultural beliefs and norms, etc. I think that in terms of the greater question and the reason, that we are, having this conversation today, the reason that we feel this Ubuntu, is a result of the African diasporic culture, right? Like there is something that connects us all, culturally speaking, beyond, racial phenotypes, right? That share an approach, that share an appreciation of humanity, that share a way of dealing with the earth, that approach food, right? And approach education and approach children in certain ways. And I think that where we are in the world today is of a gathering of all of those different ways of expression, recognizing, what we have in common and working towards solutions together that are elevated reflections of the culture that we all, have a piece of.
Thank you, Asali. Absolutely. Those distinctions, you make them very clear, but at the same time, you also make the interconnections between art and culture. So anyone else want to?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
It made me think of Beverly Robinson's definition of folk culture or folklore. We named our folk culture program after her, and she was a mentor and became a great friend. But we have the students kind of memorize that folklore is the combination of two words, folk meaning people and lore meaning knowledge, that it's a special knowledge of the people that is passed down from generation to generation, or that holds groups or communities together. So I liked, Asali, that you were making the distinction in terms of art and culture. I do think of it as something that carries our history when we talk about cultural heritage, and that we can see how we're connected. I think of when we had an opportunity, me and my daughter, she was 7 then, to go to Senegal, visit our first trip to the continent. And my mom, who spent some time in Montserrat, where her family was from, when we're in Senegal, she says, oh, wow, we used to cook from a coal pot like that. Or look at that person who looks like Uncle Vic. When we start to look at, how we're connected and the things that we didn't know were passed down to us in the songs and the way we move and the dances and the bangles we wear and who makes them, that all of that is part of it as well.
I have to agree with everyone. Culture is memory as well, and I look at, what our people have been through for the past 500 years and how we were able to carry this common thread in our minds and still create and evolve a rich and beautiful culture that honestly is American culture. There would be no American culture without the contributions of people of African descent. And, the fact that it is monetized, capitalized, and exported is proof of that, because, our culture spreads throughout the world. When you look at hip hop, when you look at music, jazz, our fashion, our dances, through TikTok or whatever, the new generation is doing. And, and you're absolutely right in a sense of Ubuntu. When we go places, when we go to Cuba, when we go to Africa, when we go to the Caribbean and we see our kindred brethren, we automatically don't even have to say a word to each other. We automatically know that those are our people.
Thank you so much. This is just amazing. One of the things that I've heard over and over again from each of you is the word connection, one way or the other. And I'm just thinking, I'm sitting down here and thinking of when reggae came to Nigeria, a form of reggae that was predominantly sung in patois. And I remember this artist called Uroy, and we didn't understand anything Uroy said linguistically, and yet Uroy was a great hit. Why? Because we understood the music, we understood the beat. And I think when you're talking about connections, I think that's part of what you're talking about. Sometimes I get the impression that it's like we have to struggle so hard to connect. I don't think so. I think it's there naturally. Another thing I like that I've heard is memory. I think it's good to recall that a lot of our societies were sustained on oral traditional forms that relied on memory. And those turned out to be quite sophisticated, stable societies. And of course, the point about no American culture without cultures from people of African descent, I don't think you can overstate that. It's absolutely true. And all you have to do is look at so many examples, everything from food to body language to the kind of slang people want to use. And, it's not just America, it's the world. When Childish Gambino sang, "This is America," suddenly everywhere there was, "This is Japan, this is Africa, this is Nigeria, this is Jamaica," and so forth. So absolutely, those connections are there, and you're absolutely right. Without people of African descent, I don't think we would know pop culture or any other kind of culture within American society the way we understand it. So thank you. That's all insightful. And eventually, we're of course going to engage the audience and listen to what they have to say. But I do have another question here. And that question is, what artistic forms and practices do you consider most relevant in preserving and creating conversations around heritage and memory? What artistic forms and practices do you consider most relevant in preserving and creating conversations around heritage and memory? And after we discuss this question, then we can, we'll move forward to eventually hearing what our audience has to say. So again, no particular order.
I would like to say food. I mean, I know that I'm in that space, but, I think that sometimes food gets left out, and people don't really consider how political it is. And, you know, just looking at what was done to indigenous folks and how, you know, they see what's happening with many indigenous folks who are trying to reclaim their foodways, but yet so much was taken from them that a lot of them don't even know where to start. And so if we lose, food is one of the last things that you lose when you lose any sense of humanity, you know. And when you look at it, even just what's happening in the South or you know, across the nation with the loss of Black farmers and land loss, right? You know, and then we have a couple of generations whose memory is now, their food memory is going to the corner store or McDonald's or, you know, Hot Flamings. Those are their food memories now, right? And they don't know anything about, you know, a home cooked meal. And maybe the only time they have a home cooked meal is when they attend an HBCU and they go to a cafe and they go inside of our cafeterias and are able to break bread with everyone. So we are in a situation where we have to talk more about food. And then you also looking at what's happening in Africa, when you're looking at what's happening in the Caribbean with, you know, the Chinese and Koreans, you know, purchasing land, you know, and you know, and even just how African cuisine on a global scale and Caribbean cuisine and Afro-Southern cuisine is treated, you know. And I say Afro-Southern cuisine because sometimes, you know, regional Southern cuisine, Black Southern cuisine is always whitewashed and turned into Southern cuisine. We have so many different cuisines, right? So I just, you know, want us to keep that in the conversation because, you know, I remember watching the Food Network a couple of years ago on Chopped, and, you know, one of the contestants didn't know what a plantain was, and, you know, was laughing at him like, who wants to eat a banana? But then we see, you know, a Ghanaian chef almost win Top Chef, but he lost to some, you know, white American Southern chefs. There's nothing wrong with that, but, you know, the bias in who judges how our food, what our food tastes like, and if it's art, and if it's culture, and if it has value matters.
Great.
And it really,
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Madaha, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I find it difficult to even choose one as being more relevant, really difficult. And then as you talk about food, you say, oh yes, absolutely, you know. And I was thinking that the oral tradition may be the easiest to see the connections and the history, you know, when people are telling their story and the experiences they've gone through and when it happened in the history. But really difficult to pick one as being particularly relevant over others.
Yes, I feel the same way about being able to choose, and what both of your feedback made me think about was just the fact of how we honor art in all of its forms, and how we allow it to express our humanity and to build aspirations for all humanity. I think that in and of itself, from the oral tradition, from dance to music, to food, there is something in the written tradition. There is something about the way that we treat art, the way that we respect it, the way that we elevate it and use it as a source of identity. I think that is maybe the cultural connection. You know, we have a program here at Ashe that we are instituting right now called Community Spread, where we're using artists as community health workers to address the 25-year difference in life expectancy between Black New Orleanians and white New Orleanians, because we find that in this culture, this, you know, American Western society culture, you know, medical is one of the most elevated of professions, right? However, we know in our communities that, you know, Western medicine was built off of the degradation and violence to our bodies. And so for us, medical people are not the most trusted messengers around health and care and wellness. And so we use our artists instead. We are training artists as community health workers and using them to directly affect people, because they are the folks that neighbors trust, right? And so that, is one of the ways I think that we should really take a different look at our culture and our art and use it to create real solutions in our community.
Thank you. Absolutely. Perhaps one form is not necessarily any more valuable or better. I guess a lot depends on how it is applied and the context. But one of the things I really like about these conversations is how I get to know what I thought I knew, but realized I never knew. If that makes sense. I never thought, for instance, about how food has been politicized. That is just amazing. And I wish I could learn more about that. That's just one, of course, out of several points that have been made on this question. But here's what I want to do. I really want us to have a conversation with the audience and other participants. So you can start putting your questions in the chat. I think Leps has already pointed that out. But this is what I want to do. One final thing before we get to those questions. I would like each of you, even though you've talked about your programs and projects, to address them very briefly, to address the subjects, to address your programs and projects, to tell us how they address, to tell us how your projects and your programs address the subject of cultural heritage and the arts directly. And more specifically, tell us what your ultimate goals are and some of the challenges that you may be facing. And again, you need not go in any particular order. And if you want me to repeat the question, again, I'll do that. I know I was fumbling there at the beginning. If not, you can just go ahead and respond.
Well, some of the projects that we've been working on, I think I mentioned that earlier, this summer, we're working on this grant to look at the legacies of American slavery. And when you look at, just the backlash with 1619 project, the critical race theory, I applaud Council of Independent Colleges for pushing this forward. And we were, I think, one of 10 universities to receive this grant. So we will be looking at cultural creativity. And like I said, our focus is on food, music, and tourism. So we'll also be, partnering with HBCUs like Fisk University or Columbia College in Chicago, and other, affiliated partners. And then this summer, we've been, filming local historians to really, go to sites of memory. For example, the Omni Hotel, on the side of it, it used to be the St. Louis Hotel, and it still says Exchange on the side, and that is where, one of the biggest auction blocks for enslaved people was in the French Quarter. And so we were able to interview Dr. Greenwald, who is the curator for Purchased Lives. We were able to go to Mississippi and interview Ben Burkett, who was a longtime Black farmer, and which some of you all might be familiar with. So by putting all of this together, it also gives our students firsthand experience and to learn history and culture in a way that is right in front of their face, and in a digital age where people's attention is, very small, and we don't have that many, many people reading like we do, you know what I mean? So we're trying to figure out how do we engage with audiences to get their attention. And one of the best ways we found is through filmmaking. And, we've just been working on, developing the greenhouse. We just got some funding. We got our windows prepared. If you're familiar with Dillard University, we have this huge greenhouse that sits in the middle of the campus, and it's just been sitting there dormant for a long time. So we're working with the botany department, biology department to actually grow, tomatoes, okra, and really, hopefully train urban gardeners. You know, we want to see Merloton plants and, you know, indigenous plants in New Orleans that, you know, grandmothers used to raise in their backyards again, you know, and if we can facilitate that and, you know, open that up to our students so that it also goes into our cafeteria and what in our bellies, you know, then I think we can, you know, change the cultural dynamic. So.
Thank you, Zella. Wants to go next? And if you want me to repeat the question, I'll repeat it. If not, just go ahead.
I'm thinking of how you mentioned filmmaking, Zella, and that makes me think of how we emphasize with our students in the community folk culture program the important role that they're playing in documenting our history and our culture, what's going on right now, and remind them that, you know, 50 years, 100 years from now, someone may be looking at what you wrote, the photos you took, how you interpreted, what you heard from an artist, why they do what they do, all of that, and that it's us interpreting our art and our history and our culture, and it's them doing it. So we do have to look at the skill of photography and videography and the importance of all of that, but also to look at incorporating into the curriculum, and that's part of the challenge, an awareness, a social and political consciousness of the biases that we have with each other, colorism and all of that. You know how we're all African people, but some of us have Latinx accents, some of us have West Indian, you know, another maybe from West Africa, Brooklyn, all of it, and how we don't realize the prejudices that we have just within our group and where they came from, how they controlled us, you know, why they exist. Whether Willie Lynch's letter is real or not, it's still something good to look at because we're still hearing the kinds of results of that. Maybe from our elders, from our neighbors, it still exists. And making sure that's a part of the curriculum is really important as well.
Thank you, Madaha. Asali?
Excellent, both of you. I'm so excited, you know, about you guys' work and being connected with it. So our focus here at Ashe is around community, culture, and commerce. We have a suite of, you know, ways that we bring art and culture to community in terms of performances. We produce about 350 artistic events per year on our campus. We have, you know, 2 performance spaces, our main building, as well as a theater around the corner. We also provide affordable housing to artists, which is something here in New Orleans that is a very pressing need considering the aggressive gentrification and displacement in our communities, and that are particularly felt in our traditional African-American neighborhoods. So we provide about 35 units of affordable housing and are looking to expand that and do more. We have service delivery. So I mentioned our program where we use artists as community health workers. And in that program, we have a poet, a singer, a medicine woman, a trumpet player, and a cook. You know, so, you know, bringing all of the arts to community and, you know, really trying to change the messages around health. And, you know, I'm raising 5 children in New Orleans, so I think they deserve to live just as long as their neighbors in Lakeview or Garden District. We also have the Alliance for Cultural Equity, which is a group of 18 small museum and archive organizations here in New Orleans that are working for funding equity in our landscape, that are tired of being looked over as Black-led and marginalized-led organizations, whereas we serve the majority of our citizens. The majority of funding goes to those white-led organizations who serve tourists. So, you know, those are our main thrusts. We're working on an economic plan. Right now, we're building a community investment trust where we are investing and producing real estate projects that our neighbors can invest in for as little as $10 a month, so that our residents are able to share in the prosperity in their neighborhoods and avoid the, you know, $50,000, $100,000 thresholds that most real estate developments have. So, you know, we're looking to build equity in policy in our city. We know that here in New Orleans, especially the industry, the #1 industry is hospitality and tourism, and that is built on the cultural product of Black folks in whatever form we take, whether we be African American, Latin, Indigenous, all of our Blackness, all of our quote unquote otherness is exploited and used to build one of the biggest tourist industries in the world. And so we are intent in getting our fair share of that, and that's what we work on.
Amazing. This is amazing stuff. It's just so much happening from culture, art, community service, you name it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just before we hear from the audience, let me just say that I do appreciate what you said, Madaha, which is often missing in these conversations, and that's some of the recent prejudices that we express towards one another, some of them the result of our colonial and unfortunately slave histories, such that you have a lot of African women in different countries compelled to bleach their skin, for instance. So thank you, stating that. But in general, what I'm hearing, what I'm hearing from the three of you is something that I've not thought about until recently, and that's the fact that originally among people of various African cultures, art was never itemized. There was nothing like drama. You couldn't do drama without music and song and dance and celebration and food. It all came together. The genres that we have now, well, I respect them, but that was never really us. Like a playwright from Nigeria, I think it's John Pepper Clark, that was his name, old generation, he said that our art appeals to the entire human being, to all the senses. It never, in other words, you never isolated, took pieces of art and isolated them, but that they came together and that we appealed to the entire human being and all our senses. All right, so what do we have in terms of questions or comments from the audience?
We do have one hand raised.
Okay, is it Donis? Please correct me if I don't.
Yes, brother.
Go ahead, please, with your comment or question.
My comment, first of all, I would like to thank all of you guys, especially you beautiful sisters, man, that have just enlightened me on some of your programs and stuff that you have going on. I'm here in Alabama, Marion, Alabama, all right, the deep South, young people, all right. And one of the things I wanted to throw out at you guys and to dig deeper into the rabbit hole is that art and culture are interchangeable words. In my experience, our art is an expression of our culture. Our culture is an expression of our art. And one of the questions I wanted to throw out is our cultural heritage at this particular point in history, is it being devalued? Is it no longer being accepted by this young generation that we are in right now? Because if you go back and you look at, the history of us being here in America and abroad, culture has been the essential thing that has kept us alive, has kept us together. And now those things like food, music, and so on and so forth has been distorted. And most importantly, food, ladies and gentlemen. We no longer eat the way that we used to when we were on the motherland. That transition that we took from Africa to Americas and abroad, our food has changed. Our food habits have changed tremendously. So we need to reteach our children the correct way of eating and so on and so forth. And also our culture has changed tremendously. What was the norm back then is not the norm now. And if you look at, all the videos that you have coming out and all the rappers and stuff that are coming out now, there is nothing that is catching the young minds to want to keep pushing forward. All the music is talking about doping yourself up or killing yourself. And when you think about the young ladies, you think about all the images and stuff and the messages and stuff that they're putting out in the young lady's head of not being the proper Black woman that our ancestors used to be, and to where they are now. So I just wanted to throw that out there at you guys.
Thank you so much. Anyone want to, that was, yeah, go ahead, Asali.
Yeah, so that was a lot. And, you know, I understand around the disconnect in a lot of ways between the younger generation and, you know, the older generation. I do believe that it is the responsibility of the older generation to make the connections and not blame the younger generation for things that they feel like they don't like. I think that the older generation has a responsibility to explore the younger generation much more and not limit our perception of them to what we see on TV and what we see in media, because they are doing and being and creating much more than what is commercialized. And so I think we need to give them credit for that and take a look into the movements and everything that they are doing and creating and make ourselves a part of them. We have that responsibility. In addition, I don't think that we should be looking to antiquated ways of asking women to be, right? When we are talking about proper women and proper young women and those kinds of things, there's a lot of patriarchy inside of that, you know, if you're looking to return to that, you're not going to get anybody interested. You have to find a new way of connecting with and honoring women that does not require them to take on the work that was required of them, that the work is shared equally between genders in this generation. That is something women are requiring that definitely was not the case for our proper mothers and grandmothers. So we have to, you know, talk about all of that inside of this conversation about who we are and who we are intending to become.
Thank you so much. Go, Zella, you want to say something?
I completely agree with Asali, you know, and I just want to encourage people, you know, that, you know, we have to stop bashing young people. You know, I work with students, first generation students, first time in college at HBCU all the time. They are the most creative students young people I have ever seen, and I have taught I've been in education for a long time, you know. And I think, you know, this generation, let's look at the positives. They have technology. They have, you know, and it's up to us to guide them on how to search for information and to decipher what, because they're bombarded with so much information and they're looking for guidance. They're begging for guidance and community, you know, because they feel abandoned. And, you know, when they feel abandoned, I mean, it's easy, you know, anything can entice them and pull them, you know, the wrong way. And then, you know, we become, you know, basically what Western capitalism wants us to become, right? So we have to be very careful with that. But, you know, and you look at just worldwide, I mean, what are Black youth, people of African descent doing worldwide? I mean, you look what happened in Nigeria over the pandemic with SARS. You know, it was a DJ that put it out there of what was happening. You look what's happening in Cuba just this weekend. You know, it's Afro-Cuban activists standing up, you know, in spite of everything. And it's technology that's getting the word out, right? So we have to really, you know, be careful of that. And especially with women, women have always led, you know, many organizations and in our culture and history, you know, and so we have to, you know, there's always going to be nuances to our who we are, as well as men, right? You know, and so we have to just, you know, we also have to do our due diligence to create media, to create content, because we don't have the Crisis magazine of W.B. Du Bois. We don't have, you know, but what we do have are our phones, right? And if we can't, you know, if we don't have the funds to have a media company that can really, you know, educate our people, then we have to continue to educate them through whatever means is possible. And if we have technology and the internet right now, then so be it.
Thank you so much. We actually have like 3 minutes. I'm asking the organizers to give us 2 extra minutes under the circumstances. What we're going to do is, there's a hand that has been up, Utirofoni Yang. You ask your question in like 15 seconds, and if we can have a response that wouldn't go past a minute, that would be great. So quickly.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful, wonderful session because it spoke to a lot of things that I intuitively feel So my question is this: in this wonderful work that you're doing in, generating culture, creating content, looking at the ways in which new media is being used as a vehicle for expression of culture, do you feel the need to more or less step beyond just the daily, everyday production and the data that generates to a kind of more elaborate extrapolation of saying, this is what we're learning from these different forms of cultural production that we're engaging in? The reason why I ask is because this question of cultural appropriation and exploitation is often when our people produce the data, produce the documentary, it now is left at that
Sorry,
stage.
I don't mean to be rude, but if you can round up, sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but go ahead and
so
just
I'm
round
wondering
up.
whether you see a need to extrapolate a little bit wider to say, this is what we're learning. So we don't have to leave it at that basic state where later knowledge production is now taken from there and then, attributed to other sources because they did that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say that is an incredibly complex question that is present right now and deserves a whole lot of conversation. I don't think there's an answer. Like, I know how I feel. I know everybody probably has, strong feelings about it. And maybe we can implore upon, this group who's convened us to, further extend that conversation, because there's a lot being said and a lot to be said about your question.
Right. Maybe one more question. And that was a hand that was up for a long time. I don't see that hand again.
I would like to suggest that they put their question in the chat box, and can we also go to the chats and answer the questions? I'm really worried about time. I don't want us to spill over after our end time. So I really want Philip to wrap up so that we can move on to the last session.
All right. Absolutely. So go ahead and put your questions. And sorry, like Upen, you said earlier, unfortunately, we can't get to every question right away, but as long as they're in the chat, we can get to them. So what I'd like to do at this time is just have Madaha, Asali, and Zella just say one final comment, and it can just be in a couple of seconds.
It's just wonderful to be coming together like this and feeling so comfortable. And it did become a conversation, and it's something that we must do much more often as we learn from each other and support each other and encourage each other. Thank you all. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for having me on this panel. And it was, it's always good to be in community and, just figure out how we can support each other, looking forward. So thank you so much.
I extend my gratitude as well to the conveners, to my fellow panelists, for your work and your inspiration, and certainly to the folks who are in the room for bringing this energy of inquisition and discovery and, how do we get to solutions? Like, that's my energy. So I welcome all of y'all to, be in conversation and contact with me. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much, Asali, Madaha, and Zella, for your insightful comments and views. We wish you the absolute best as you move forward with your different programs and initiatives. Well, we're now ready to move on to our next session, which will be focusing on the theme cultural heritage and creative arts as sites of memory and dialogue, practitioner experiences and insights. So over to you, Monica.